Benito Mussolini ruled Italy with absolute fear for decades. But by 1945, his power was gone. The same country he ruled turned on him, and within days, he was captured alongside his mistress, Clara Petacci. What followed was a brutal public execution that shocked the whole world. By April 1945, northern Italy was falling apart fast. The German army was retreating on every front. Allied troops had already pushed through central Italy and were now smashing through the last German defensive line, known as the Gothic Line. On April 18th, Allied forces broke through near the Argenta Gap. British and American units moved quickly across the Po Valley. German resistance was collapsing. Mussolini was no longer leading rallies or giving speeches from balconies. He was 61 years old, sick, tired, and isolated. Since September 1943, after being rescued by German commandos, he had been ruling the Italian Social Republic from towns around Lake Garda. It sounded official, but in reality, it survived only because German troops protected it. Without them, it would have fallen in days. German commanders made the real military decisions. Mussolini's authority was mostly symbolic by 1945. Inside this shrinking pocket of control, fear was growing. Italian partisans were no longer small underground groups. By spring 1945, they numbered around 200,000 fighters across northern Italy. They controlled mountain routes, sabotaged rail lines, and attacked fascist officials. Entire towns were slipping out of fascist hands. On April 21, 1945, Bologna fell to Allied forces. That was a huge blow. Bologna was a key transport hub. German units began pulling back north in disorder. By April 24th, partisan uprisings were breaking out in cities like Genoa and Turin. Milan, the industrial heart of northern Italy, was preparing to explode. On April 25th, the Committee of National Liberation for Northern Italy officially called for a general uprising. This was not just talk. Armed partisans moved to seize police stations, government buildings, and radio stations. Fascist control inside Milan was crumbling by the hour. That same day, Mussolini realized the game was over. He met Cardinal Alfredo Ildefonso Schuster at the Archbishop's Palace in Milan. The cardinal had tried before to act as a mediator between fascists and anti-fascists. Mussolini hoped, even at this late stage, that some kind of negotiated surrender might protect him from execution. Representatives from the resistance were present in the building, but they were clear. There would be no deal unless he surrendered unconditionally. Unconditional surrender meant arrest, and arrest likely meant death. The meeting ended with nothing resolved. Mussolini walked out of the palace, knowing he had no political path left. No army he could trust. No city he controlled. No allies who could save him inside Italy. By late afternoon on April 25th, he left Milan in a convoy heading north. The official excuse was the relocation of government offices. In reality, it was an escape attempt. His plan was simple: reach the Swiss border near Lake Como, cross into Switzerland, seek asylum. From there, maybe negotiate safe passage to Spain, where General Franco was still in power and friendly to former fascists. It was a long shot, but it was something. As darkness fell on April 25th, Mussolini was on the road toward Lake Como, and he was not alone. Clara Petacci was with him. She was 33 years old in April 1945. She had been involved with Mussolini since 1936. Her family had benefited from the regime. Her father, Francesco Petacci, was a well-known doctor in Rome with strong fascist connections. By 1945, she understood perfectly what capture could mean. There had been talk earlier in the war about sending her to Spain for safety. Clara could likely have escaped if she had tried seriously before the collapse, but she refused to leave. When Mussolini was preparing to leave Milan on April 25th, she insisted on going with him. She wasn't forced. Several accounts from people present at the time confirm that she chose to stay at his side. Her brother, Marcello Petacci, also joined the convoy. Marcello hoped to protect family interests and possibly escape with them. The convoy they joined was not a glamorous motorcade. It was a retreat column. Around 30 vehicles moved north, including cars and military trucks. About 200 German soldiers from a Luftwaffe anti-aircraft unit were part of the group. These were mostly flak troops retreating toward Germany. Mussolini understood the danger of being recognized. He changed clothes. He put on a German greatcoat. He wore a steel helmet and tried to blend in with the German soldiers, sitting quietly in the back of a truck. He did not speak much and avoided eye contact at checkpoints. This was a man who once loved attention. Now he wanted to disappear. He wasn't giving orders. He wasn't planning a comeback. He was not preparing one last speech to loyal supporters. He was trying to survive long enough to reach Switzerland. But northern Italy was no longer his territory. Partisan units controlled many of the roads around Lake Como. They had set up checkpoints, especially on routes heading toward the Swiss border. They knew fascist leaders would try to escape that way, and they were watching every convoy that passed. By the afternoon of April 27, 1945, the convoy moving north along the western shore of Lake Como reached the small town of Dongo. It was a quiet lakeside place, surrounded by mountains, the kind of town that had mostly stayed out of big history. But that day, history drove straight into it. Local partisan fighters from the 52nd Garibaldi Brigade had set up roadblocks along the narrow lake road. The German officer in charge of the convoy tried to negotiate with the partisans. He claimed the convoy contained only German military personnel retreating toward the border. He insisted there were no Italian political leaders inside. The partisans did not believe him. They demanded a full inspection. One by one, Italians hiding among the Germans were pulled from the trucks. Several well-known fascist officials were recognized immediately. Some tried to stay calm. Others looked terrified. Mussolini sat in the back of a truck. He kept his head down, but someone noticed him. Partisan fighter Urbano Lazzaro later explained that he recognized Mussolini's face despite the disguise. Another partisan commander, Pierluigi Bellini della Stella, also identified him, pulled him down from the truck, and brought him aside. Clara Petacci was identified separately. She had not been hiding in the same way. She was detained as well. Her brother Marcello Petacci was also arrested with the group. By early evening, Mussolini was officially a prisoner of the Italian resistance. The news spread quickly through partisan channels. The most wanted man in Italy had been captured alive. After more than 20 years in power, the dictator had been stopped not by a foreign army, but by local resistance fighters in a small town by a lake. But capturing him was only the first step. That night, April 27th, Mussolini and Clara Petacci were held in Dongo under armed guard. They were moved between buildings for security reasons. The situation was tense. German troops were still present in northern Italy, and there was real concern that a rescue attempt could happen if word spread too widely. Several high-ranking fascist officials captured with the convoy were also detained. Among them was Alessandro Pavolini, the secretary of the Republican Fascist Party, and one of Mussolini's most loyal supporters. Also present was Nicola Bombacci, a former socialist who had once been close to Lenin before later supporting fascism. These were not small figures. They were top leaders of the regime. Meanwhile, the Committee of National Liberation for Northern Italy, the main political body coordinating the resistance, was contacted in Milan. This committee included representatives from different anti-fascist parties, including communists, socialists, Christian Democrats, and liberals. They had already called for a general uprising on April 25th. The Allies had previously suggested that major fascist leaders should ideally be handed over for formal prosecution. But in reality, northern Italy in late April 1945 was unstable. German forces were still armed. Fighting was still happening in some areas. Communication with Allied command was not smooth or fast. There was fear that if Mussolini were kept alive too long, something unexpected could happen. There was also deep anger among partisan fighters. Many had lost friends and family during fascist reprisals. Just months earlier, in August 1944, 15 partisans had been executed in Milan at Piazzale Loreto. The memory was still fresh. On the morning of April 28, 1945, orders arrived from Milan. Mussolini was to be executed. The man sent to carry out the sentence was Walter Audisio, a communist partisan who used the name Colonel Valerio. He had been given authority by the resistance leadership to perform the execution. He arrived in Dongo that morning with other partisans. There would be no formal trial, no courtroom, no defense lawyer, no long legal process. The decision had been made quickly and firmly. By the afternoon of April 28th, everything was moving fast. Mussolini and Clara Petacci had spent the night under guard. That morning, partisan commander Pier Luigi Bellini della Stella and others were waiting for clear instructions from Milan. The order from the Committee of National Liberation for Northern Italy was to execute Mussolini immediately. Around 3 p.m., Mussolini and Clara were placed in a vehicle and driven south along the western edge of Lake Como. It was an ordinary afternoon in the village of Giulino di Mezzegra, which today is part of Tremezzina. Nothing about the setting looked historic. No large crowd, no stage. Just a narrow road called Via 24 Maggio and the entrance gate of Villa Belmonte. When they stepped out of the vehicle, Mussolini looked physically drained. Witnesses later said he appeared pale, heavy, and almost distant, as if he understood that nothing could change the outcome. He didn't attempt to run. He did not argue. He stood near the wall. Clara stayed beside him. She had not been sentenced by any formal body. There had been no debate about her fate, but she refused to leave him. Shortly after 4 p.m., Walter Audisio placed them in position against the wall near the iron gate. According to several accounts, he tried to fire his submachine gun, but it jammed. There was confusion for a few seconds. Another weapon was handed to him, reportedly a French-made MAS-38 submachine gun taken from a fallen soldier. This time, it worked. Multiple shots were fired at close range. Mussolini was hit in the chest. He collapsed almost immediately. Clara Petacci was struck in the burst of gunfire and fell beside him. The entire act lasted only seconds. Back in Dongo, at roughly the same time, other captured fascist officials were taken to the lakeside and executed by partisan firing squads. In total, around 15 high-ranking fascists were shot that day. Their bodies were laid out in the town square before being prepared for transport. There was no ceremony, no official reading of charges, just gunfire and silence afterward. The dictator who had ruled Italy since 1922 lay dead beside a village wall. For the partisans, it was the end of a long and brutal fight. For Italy, it was only the beginning of something far more public, because killing Mussolini was one thing. After the executions, the bodies were loaded into a truck during the night of April 28th. The convoy drove about 80 kilometers south toward Milan. The journey took several hours over dark, damaged roads. The war was still active. German forces had not fully surrendered yet, but the partisans wanted the bodies displayed in the city that had suffered heavily under fascist rule. They arrived in Milan in the early hours of April 29, 1945. The location chosen was Piazzale Loreto. That choice was deliberate and symbolic. At first light, word began to spread. By mid-morning, hundreds, then thousands of people gathered. Many had lost relatives in bombings. Others had been jailed or beaten by fascist forces. Food shortages during the war had pushed families to the edge of starvation. Milan had been bombed repeatedly between 1942 and 1944. The anger had been building for years. When the crowd saw Mussolini's body lying on the ground, the reaction was immediate and uncontrolled. People rushed forward. Some kicked the corpse, others spat on it. There were blows with sticks and fists. Several shots were fired into the body again. Clara Petacci's body was also dragged and abused by members of the crowd. The scene was chaotic and emotional. It was not organized revenge. It was an explosion. At some point later that morning, partisans decided to lift the bodies off the ground. They were taken to the metal framework of a damaged Esso petrol station at the edge of the square. Using ropes, Mussolini, Clara Petacci, and several other executed fascists were hung upside down by their feet, their heads faced downward toward the crowd. Within hours of being hung in Piazzale Loreto, photographers were already developing film. Some were local Italian photographers. Others worked for international agencies. The war in Europe was almost over, and foreign correspondents were moving through northern Italy with Allied forces. They quickly understood that this was not just another battlefield scene. Within days, the photographs crossed borders. Newspapers in the United States, Britain, France, and other parts of Europe printed them on front pages. Major American papers carried the images. British newspapers did the same. For many people outside Italy, this was the first time they had seen a dictator not just defeated, but physically humiliated after death. In earlier wars, leaders were often exiled, imprisoned, or quietly executed. Here, the images showed something different. There was no dignity, no ceremony, no national funeral. The man who once stood on the balcony of Palazzo Venezia in Rome, chest out, speaking to massive crowds, now dangled from a damaged gas station in an industrial square. The symbolism was harsh and impossible to ignore. Mussolini had built his image around strength, control, and spectacle. In the end, the spectacle turned against him. The bodies remained hanging for several hours before local authorities decided to take them down. They were eventually cut loose and transported to the city morgue in Milan for examination. But by that point, it did not matter. The cameras had already done their work. News of Mussolini's death and the shocking display in Milan also reached Adolf Hitler in his bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery. Hitler had watched Mussolini rise to power and knew the man personally. Seeing how the Italians had captured him, executed him without trial, and hung his body upside down for the world to see, sent a clear and terrifying message. The images from Piazzale Loreto, carried by radio broadcasts and Allied reports, reportedly unsettled Hitler deeply. By the next day, April 30th, Hitler killed himself, refusing to face capture. Many historians believe that the public humiliation of Mussolini's corpse directly influenced Hitler's decision, showing him in brutal terms what could happen if he were caught alive. On May 2, 1945, Mussolini's body was buried quietly in an unmarked grave at Musocco Cemetery in Milan. There was no public ceremony. The grave was intentionally kept anonymous to prevent it from becoming a rallying point for fascist supporters. But the story did not end there. In the early hours of April 23, 1946, almost 1 year after the execution, a group of neo-fascist sympathizers, led by Domenico Lecisi, dug up the body. Lecisi was a young fascist activist who believed Mussolini deserved a proper burial. The group removed the coffin and hid the remains. For months, Italian police searched across northern Italy. The body was eventually recovered in August 1946 in a monastery near Milan where it had been concealed. The Italian government kept the remains under control for more than a decade. Officials feared that returning the body to his hometown would turn it into a political shrine. Finally, in 1957, under Prime Minister Adon Nizzoli, the government allowed the remains to be transferred to Predappio, Mussolini's birthplace in the Emilia-Romagna region. There he was placed in the Mussolini family crypt, where he remains buried today. Clara Petacci was buried separately in Rome in the Verano Cemetery. Her burial did not attract the same political attention, but her name remained forever tied to those final hours in April 1945. Over the years, debates continued in Italy about justice, revenge, and memory. But no argument, no later burial, and no political discussion erased what happened on April 29, 1945.